So let me introduce our agenda of the day and then hand over to our expert speaker. In this webinar, Decent Exposure Powering CSPs into the API Economy, David Hovey of Amdocs will talk us through the nitty-gritty of exposure and its value and relevance to CSPs and the opportunity that exposure creates in the context of 5G. He will also explain why exposure is the center of gravity, and that's really the bit I'm most excited about. We will also learn more about exposure through a couple of concrete use cases. And then finally, David will conclude by discussing the API ecosystem and marketplace. So as you can already tell, we have a packed agenda. I don't want to be taking time from our expert speaker. So without further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to David Hovey, Director of 5G Product Management and Cloud Strategy. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Armita. I couldn't introduce anything better, so thank you for spending the time and giving your perspective on it. And actually, I'll do a slight correction. It is called Decent Exposure, but just I tried to play on words because we have so many webinars going out in the world today that I thought one that grabs the attention. And why did I think of indecent exposure? And I think, you know, you pointed to it, right? You pointed to the fact that exposure as a topic is not new. You know, so I haven't just invented something and we're going to look into something totally different. But you know, so it's something that's been done before, and I think it's been something that's been insufficiently done. And there are lots of reasons, lots of attributes and different orthogonal things that have happened and not happened in the past. And a lot has changed since then, all right? So that's really what we're going to explore today. So thanks again for the introduction. So let's start with some context, right? I think all these topics, especially the kind of complex ones, which may not have an obvious beginning or an obvious end, they all sit within a context, right? And this is not going to be exhaustive, otherwise we'd spend the whole 40 minutes just talking about the context. But you know, what's true is, you know, there is a growth issue, right? And we'll look at this in a bit more detail on the next slide. You know, CSPs, they have evolved, and they are driving further investments now. Adopting cloud, you know, there's a certain cloud adoption, although even that is not universal. You know, and there's a lot of discussions on public, private, hybrid, you know, many different versions. And these things are happening for a reason, partially for technology adoption for the sake of moving forwards, but also perhaps improving business models and cost of goods and all this type of thing. And also to support the 5G deployment itself. A lot of 5G technology is coming as cloud native now. So there's a certain kind of momentum behind a technological progress within there. So there's technological growth, but the ability to capture the new value created thanks to the adoption of the new technologies, and therefore kind of sustenance of the kind of ever more difficult economic model, that's difficult. And again, we'll look at that in the next slide. Look at some real numbers. You know, I've been 25 years in this industry, and I must admit, you know, in a sense, sometimes I look at it and I think this is a bit disappointing. You know, we're doing so many things, so much amazing technology, and the standards and release 16, release 17, it's going so far. But the real business coming out, that's a tough one. And so what's happening is there's a kind of nexus of new players in the game. Obviously, the hyperscalers have really elbowed their way into the technology market and supplying a huge amount of good stuff. But I think, you know, again, from the perspective of CSP, there's definitely a partnership and a kind of technology acquisition angle to there, but also in a sense the risk that a lot of these newcomers, not just the hyperscalers, are quite ready to fill in the gaps, right? So if the CSP doesn't move and the CSP doesn't actually adapt and drive its own technology out and create value with that, then probably somebody else will do it instead of them. And that's you know, that's always something to be very much conscious of, or almost be scared of that, right? So, and you know, so one of my daughters loves horses, so I think this expression is wonderful, right? So there's this concept of perfecting the horse. Now, what is the horse? The horse is the network. Okay, so we've effectively built this horse. We've built the muscles. We've trained it, and every day we can jump a bit higher and we can go further, and that's great. But you know, just continuously perfecting that horse is actually not enough. You know, that yes, we need to do it. I'm not saying it's not needing to be done. Yes, we should adopt Open RAN and all these wonderful things which drive the technology advancement, but it's not just about a better network. And so this kind of decoupling of saying that's actually one thing to do, but that's in its own track. Actually, the ability to abstract what you're doing there and embrace and effectively drive new ecosystem approaches, that's what will make the difference. It's not building the network that creates success. What creates success is truly to change something. And I think that's a very powerful thing. So I promised you a little bit more detail. This is a bit of an eyesore. I did try to simplify it, but I think having some detail in there is good. On the left-hand side, we have some of the attributes, of the financial attributes of the top 25 CSPs. This is between 2016 and 2021. And first of all, the first observation, of course, is look how close to zero everything is, right? So yes, the subscribers is actually one of the most impressive things, the number of subscribers going up. Is that helping? Is it really helping? You know, is my market capitalization going up? Because people are saying, the investors are saying, wow, fantastic, they got 5% more. No, it's going down. And when you compare that to the Standard & Poor's top 500, you know, who in pretty well the same period, they grew an average of 20%, and we're declining at -4%. That something smells there, right? It's inherently something wrong. Now, again, this is not all miserable. I'm a very positive person in my personal and professional life, so I'm not saying that we're headed into some kind of abyss or something. But what I am saying is that there is a correction to be made, and that's a lot of what we're talking about in this presentation. I'm kind of half techie, half strategic, half kind of you know, I try and have my head somewhere forward so that we're actually going somewhere as opposed to just fixing things on the way. And I truly believe that this is one of the numbers that we've really got to focus on, and on how to do that. And at the same time as all of this is happening, if you look on the right-hand side, then actually some other players, so other sectors which are very much related to the CSP market, well, they are monetizing, they are growing. And if you look at the growth, you know, the kind of cumulative annual growth rate in terms of devices, infrastructure, digital services provided by some of the OTT players and some of the big internet companies, well, you know, numbers speak for themselves. And if you look at the kind of share, if you look at market capitalization of these type of companies between the top 25 SPs, top 8 internet companies, look in 2014, they were almost the same. Now you fast forward, and this is 3 years ago now, you fast forward to 2019, that's not a nice thing to look at. Well, unless you're a top 8 internet company, right? So I think, you know, this is very much, I'm very close professionally, I think, and the company I work for as well. We're very close to the CSP industry. It's something that I truly believe in. And, you know, I think the technological focus on what we're talking about today in exposure, please think of everything I'm about to say in the context of these first two kind of scene-setting slides, because it's really, really important. Now, if you then think about, well, how do I do that? How do I look more like one of those other players and actually get my numbers above zero into double digits and everything? How do I actually? What do I actually need to do? What do I need to achieve? Now, if you look today in 2022, and this graph is an illustrative graph, please don't measure the size of the things. You know, I plug numbers in to make a point. Okay, and if we look at the yellow part, then the yellow part really represents it's the horse, right? That's our powerful horse. We've been perfecting it, and it's all muscled up, and it's running faster than last week, and that's where our cash is coming from. Absolutely, we need to protect that. But this is really, I'd call it a kind of unipolar business model. Right? We're selling what we want to sell to a big target audience, and that's what we do. We do it better than last year. We adapt and adjust all the time. Effectively, we're not really changing anything, right? Now, moving forwards to start to really fix the root issue, which is actually about growing the pie and diversifying where the revenues come from. So if we now look at this illustration, for example, for 26, that looks nicer, right? Looks nicer because it's bigger. It's bigger means there's more money coming in, and obviously more money coming in makes us ordinarily more profitable, especially since we're adopting cloud technologies and Open RAN and all the stuff I talked about before. It drives our cost of goods down. So in theory, more revenue, lower cost of goods. When you start to create more margin, EBIT goes up and your market cap goes up, and wow, everything just works. It's like an Excel spreadsheet, right? Kind of working for you. But note how it got bigger. It didn't necessarily get bigger because the yellow part got bigger. We're still driving that. That horse is even more muscly than it was 4 years ago. It's unbelievable. But what we've done is we've now got some more horses on the team. And what those other horses are doing is that they are effectively locking us in to a trading relationship outside our traditional sales area, if you like, where we've been generating our revenue for the last 30 years. And we've actually made ourselves capable of being a trading post, if you like, of exactly as Armita said, of our assets. And our network is not just a network. It's not just about creating a connection. It is a network and a set of IT constructs, which gives us a huge set of assets. And this is what we call platformization, right? So there's a lot of kind of keywords around that. And everything's connected together here. So all of those concepts come together, and that's what really drives this ability to kind of launch forward. Now, obviously, I work for a vendor. I did start my professional life working in the CSP industry. I used to work for a British one, and spent a long time in the vendor community. So obviously, this is my opinion. It's our opinion. But Armita, you don't work for a vendor. You have an amazing position, which is every day you can neutrally speak to any type of CSP across the planet, and colleagues and everything. What do you think about this? Is this something that resonates with you?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It does resonate, especially from my time as an analyst. Used to look at quarterly KPIs of operators very, very regularly on a daily basis as well. Totally resonates that this kind of, you use the horse analogy, let me use a pie analogy, because I like pies. Perhaps if I refer to this, oh yeah, you've got it on your slide as well, the diversified pie. What I typically have seen where or rather an attempt of diversification has taken place, examples would be, diversifying into a no-frills brand or diversifying via MVNOs, which are great business models for those target markets, for that addressable market. But on the whole, not much is changing. It's still the same addressable market, as you're saying, the consumer, the subscriber, the core. And yes, it must be protected. But if we want to grow the pie as a whole, you're quite right there that we need to change something, restructure. I think you restructure it. I think you called it in a previous slide. Otherwise, what we end up doing is we're just, trying the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result, but we're not getting a different result really, because we haven't changed anything in the core way of doing things. Isn't there a famous quote for that as well? So yeah, that's my quick 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Armita. I'll add your 2 cents to the pie. That will grow it a little bit more. And it's a very good point, actually. I think that expression is a very good one, coming from Einstein, if I remember correctly. And we're actually going to come back to Einstein with gravity later on. So for everybody watching, then watch out. We have another technical connection coming up. So, all right, so let's go back then. So pragmatically, what's going on underneath this? So we've looked at a lot of the reasoning now. We looked at the unipolar business model, remember in the previous slide. So we're saying that, in fact, today what we have is very often a kind of traditional integrated carrier. Many carriers are integrated, some are not, but you effectively have this kind of point-to-point business model, which is working very well. Again, back to the horse analogy. It's well-greased. It's absolutely fit for purpose. Great. There's still more stuff we can do. I'm not saying we just kind of stop and leave it going. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Having said that, moving forward, as we start to have the ability to integrate and to benefit from what I'm going to call 5G currencies, and of course there's a double usage of the word currencies here, right? So obviously we're looking at the monetary side of currencies, saying, well, actually, how can we transform the new capabilities and effectively functions which 5G gives us, back to assets again, and I call these technological currencies. That's the way that we refer to it. So actually what you're doing now is you're effectively looking at what you have in terms of your network, your IT assets, your ability to understand your consumers' databases, the ability to analyze. Actually, there's a lot of stuff going on that before we thought a lot of it was just back office, right? But actually what we can do is we can bring everything to the front office now and start to build effectively go-to-market channels. And these translate to many times you'll have X as a service type of use cases that will drive out of that. So if you want to start to drive, for example, metaverse, I just gave a presentation earlier on today on the metaverse, thinking, well, what about, where's the relevance? How can the CSP, for example, become a currency provider into the metaverse, so that if they didn't do that, then the metaverse would be this, and if they did do that, then the metaverse would be this. And that net difference is actually the value that you're then effectively translating from what you're doing, what you're performing, what you're exposing, coming back to the topic of today, into the metaverse. And this is all about these lines in the middle. And this is just a set of examples, okay? We can never draw all of that, it just look too messy. Is that, how do I plug in that value? How do I expose that value? How do I integrate with what's going on around me? And this is a really, really key point. And with 5G standalone, so in your introduction, you did mention that the inflection point, which is on us now, and it's been coming for a while, okay? So let's not forget that, so this presentation is going out middle of 2022, so whenever you watch the recording, think of it in this respect. I think a lot of people perhaps a little bit 2 steps away from the industry think, well, 5G is kind of done, because it's been there since 2019, right? You had some launches, and that was all very exciting. And this is really the difference. So the non-standalone architecture was effectively the connection of what we call 5G new radio into the 4G network. So it was effectively a reskinning of a 4G network. So visibly, and here's my demonstration here. I'm going to do a live demonstration. So my iPhone there, it has I think in my office it doesn't work, but it has a 5G signal on it. And me as a consumer, I think, wow, fantastic. Well, they've done it. But actually all they've done, as I mentioned before, I think the skinning concept is a good one, is that they've effectively created this kind of new layer of access, which has different characteristics to the 4G radio. And it depends how much spectrum you put there and whether you use things like DSS and various other techniques. But ultimately, you haven't really done anything. So going back to, this doing the same thing and expecting something to be different. So in a sense, just deploying 5G NSA, we actually can't really expect anything different. Other than the marketing spin that it gives us quite often the ability to lock in our subscribers for perhaps a new contract period, which raises the customer lifetime value. There's some good stuff, but that's really kind of tweaking around the edges, I'd call that. So this transition, this inflection point when standalone comes in, and for those who are kind of wondering what the difference is, the standalone is really where we take the core network architecture and we replace it, or we evolve to it. It's not an overnight thing. We replace it with a cloud-native set of components defined in 3GPP, which actually looks far more complex than the 4G and the 3G networks before it. But actually what we're doing is we're disaggregating the network, even the core network, so that the components can now be spread and elasticized effectively infinitely. So this gives us the ability to build very profitable, very performant, very small networks. So the concept of private networks, it allows us to benefit from all the things that cloud gives us, especially around things like elasticity and cloud compute on demand and all this type of thing. So there's some great stuff that goes on there. But more to the point, within the standards, and this is actually delivered within 3GP standards, so it'll be a global thing. If it works in one country, it'll work in another, is we start to get these currencies. Okay, so look at these technical currencies, which are written out in this kind of orange-yellow color. And I'm colorblind, so excuse me if it's not yellow or orange, but it looks like it to me. And these set of 5G currencies are really the things where, we say these are not just engineering tricks. They're not just stuff that appears in the standards and you kind of sit back and think, that's interesting. It's not that. That is interesting. What can I do with that? What can I call that? How can I commercialize that? How useful is that to which segment to do what? And that change of mindset is now saying, I'm not just going to effectively deploy the next standard, market that, and move on to the next thing. What I'm actually doing is I'm going to open the box. And this is a very different way of doing things. As I said, I started my career working for a CSP, and what I've seen since then, and this is a bit of a malaise, I think, in the industry, is that we often consider the mobile network as a black box. So it kind of comes in one end and pops out in the other, and there's a kind of money machine in the middle. But that's not how parallel industries work. The white box mechanism to say, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up and I'm going to see all the gears and everything turning around, and I'm going to look at how I can use them in new, innovative ways and allow other people to use them, so actually pass the power on to other people who are perhaps more innovative than me, who are investing in other ecosystems that I have no knowledge about, and I actually create new layers of money that I never made before. And that goes back to that diversification, to the additional horses. Okay, so this is really, really key. And these attributes, this kind of transition really gives exposure the kind of mechanism to plug into hyperscalers, to plug into ecosystems, large systems integrators, drive new go-to-market channels, and we'll be looking at that. So on the topic of go-to-market channels, how does that work? Well, the concept there, if you look at CSP exposure, so I've now simplified things a lot in this diagram. If we look at the bottom, we have a exposure. So the 3GPP term for exposure is an NEF, a network exposure function. Notice that I'm talking about exposure here, because it's not just about exposing the network. So there's a kind of subtle difference, but actually this subtlety means a lot, which we'll get onto later on. So this CSP exposure is effectively coupling what happens in the networks and in the IoT systems, in the IT, the cloud, the edge resources, and more, and acting like a center of gravity. And I told you we'd talk about Einstein again. So as a center of gravity for integration. Okay, and this is the point: is that how, as a CSP, how can I make myself magnetic? So I'm adding another physical force here, but gravity and magnetism are very similar. Is that what you're doing? Is you're allowing yourself to be eminently attractive, let's say, so that if I'm a B2D developer, so this is a B2D go-to-market channel here. If I'm a business development, if I'm a B2D developer, so in the community outside, thinking of creating smart startups. If I'm an existing enterprise and I already have I'm a car manufacturer, for example, and I already run a fleet of thousands or tens or hundreds or millions of connected cars, all getting new software and being constantly updated for driver experiences, all these things, that's a B2B2X relationship. How do I get magnetized? How do I kind of fall into the trap, if you like? How do I get injected with the drug of why it's good to be exposed to what CSPs can do, and that in fact I get a lot of my own problems solved, and that I can actually do the impossible. So I turn the impossible into the possible. I do what I'm already doing better. I do what I'm already doing in a cheaper, more efficient way. All of the different kind of aspects of how to improve business and products. All right. So this center of gravity concept is quite a physical one, and I hope it resonates. So let's use that car example that I just mentioned. There's no particular choice. I don't own a BMW myself, and I have no shares in them. This is it's just a well-known brand. So let's use that brand as a concept. We're going to look at two kind of business tracks. Okay, so let's not forget we're talking about exposure, which is, at its roots, it's a highly technical thing. Notice I'm not presenting huge amounts of technology here. We'll get on that a bit later. But what we're talking about is outcomes. Okay, so if we're going to expose something, and if all of the stuff I've talked about and all of that needle changing is actually happening, then I'm doing it in order to solve business outcomes. And we're going to talk about BMW's business outcomes here. So the first one they have is that this is a B2B2X model. Their passion is making their cars more drivable, more enjoyable, more this, more better, right? Better than the other competitors whose names I won't mention. And so this is their interest, okay? And we're looking at an example about what they did with exposure to make that happen. At the same time, they're not just a product company, because that's really what number one is about here, is giving better products, but they're also a manufacturer. Okay, so obviously they're a manufacturer. They're a huge one, and they like many other manufacturing sectors have to become more dynamic. They need to react faster. They need to be more agile. They need to pivot and maybe move towards electric cars and all these things. They can't keep the same model. They can't keep a kind of fixed factory line. That's kind of so yesterday, right? That's something we need to move beyond. So this concept of an unwired, reconfigurable factory, I'm not selling the concept here. That's not my point. But I hope we all agree it sounds like a damn good thing, right? And so the point with this one then is adopting 5G, integrating with the API, so integrating using the exposure to deliver an end-to-end solution which allows them to become a better manufacturer and to increase speed and reduce costs and all that good stuff. So in the first one, here we have effectively the relationship, the set of relationships that are created. We have telco network or networks on the left-hand side. So those are the assets, okay? And in those assets, let's not forget that you have your horses, which is effectively your currencies, which you're starting to then team up, and you're effectively exposing that to the enterprise division of BMW. All right, so this is actually, and I think the funny thing now is if you buy a modern car, then it seems to be half hardware and half software. So with our cars here, we both actually recently had a problem. And we sent them back to the garage, and it turned out both faults were just software. They just gave them some upgrades, and they gave the cars back. It just, for me, anecdotally, it's really odd now to think that your car, you can't touch it anymore. You need a laptop and a special adapter to go into it. So this is all very real. So now this vehicle division who design the software, who actually build the cars and build the experiences, they're the ones who are now adopting and absorbing and loving what you as a CSP are exposing to them, because it makes them do so much more. It makes them be able. It gives them the ability to provide to their consumers. And now we look on the right-hand side, a set of valuable experiences, better infotainment, better driving aids, vehicle-to-vehicle networks. So all that stuff suddenly becomes possible thanks to the integration. So you see, you can start at either end here, and of course the best way is to work backwards from a passionately delivered customer experience. How do I do that? And which partners do I need to allow me to do that? And exposure is what ties everybody together. And it's the same in the second example. So here we have a private 5G network deployed in that factory we were talking about earlier on. We have third-party SCADA, programmable logic controllers, real-time robotics, all those wonderful things that goes on in these factories. When you watch videos of it, it just looks like another world, right? And we even have, I think, factories where robots are making robots now. So that's another subject for another day, perhaps. But now think of that the supplier of that type of technology, the big Siemens, the big ABBs, and all these big manufacturers of very complex automation technology, now also adopting the APIs, which can then drive even the private network. Because, of course, these are very demanding applications. And it's simply not possible to build networks so that every single connection to every single device is always configured to the maximum possible needs of that device all the time, because the efficiency of doing that and the size and it doesn't work. All right. So again, working backwards from a transformed factory, from things that just work, even though there's no more wires other than power, backwards into the deployment of an efficient, well-designed, elastic network, which reacts in perfect synchronization with the needs of real-time equipment. That's a very different use case, but actually, you know what it is? It's all exposure. And the list goes on and on, right? So I haven't prepared 99 others, otherwise, again, we'd be here all day. But think of your own value chain. Think of your own set of relationships. Think of which industry vertical, perhaps in your country, or perhaps that historically you as a CSP have relationships with, or you have a special path to get to them. Those are the soft spots. Those are the ones where looking into their understanding, talking their language, and being able to translate that into your currencies and pass that on, it's transformational. And I would like to say that this is not news. Somebody's done this already, and I would argue that the cloud players have done this. Okay, and I'd posit a couple of things. So a couple of slides here on a comparison with cloud. I know we hear about cloud all the time, but 16 plus years ago, if I'd been on a webinar and talked about cloud, then you'd probably look out the window to see if it's raining, right? Because cloud didn't actually exist, let's say 17 years ago. And it was really an innovation and a kind of moniker which was created once we'd virtualized and effectively displaced compute and storage. So that was two things. There were two horses. There were two levers that we could pull. And as an early adopter of cloud, you could say, you know what? Oh, I want to stop buying computing and putting it in a data center that I've got to cool and secure, and we know the story. I'll let someone else bother doing that because that's not my core business. And that was a nascence. That was a birth of cloud, right? And now we fast forward 16 years later, and what's happened, and I've just taken an AWS example here. It's just an example, like BMW, is that what AWS have done is they have organically added service after service after service after service, which effectively build on and expand around that kind of core hub of divorcing problems away from customers. Because actually what we're trying to do here is to solve other people's problems so that they can focus on their core business, which is not compute, it's not storage, it's not artificial intelligence systems, it's not databases. You know, why should they spend any cycles doing that when they should be spending all their cycles making their business better, making their customers more happy? I think we know the story. I can't sell cloud better than those guys. So if you want any convincing, go and watch, go and watch one of the myriad videos which those guys push out onto YouTube, for example. Now, if we do the comparison with 5G, I would argue then is that with 5G standalone, what we get, and they're just some of the examples in very small text there, but what we get within the standards, and by the way, that's just the standards, I'm not even talking about the kind of non-standard parts, is we get way over 50 programmable capabilities, all right, which are available, they're at our disposition. Remember I talked about currencies earlier on, so I'm talking about the same thing here. And that those currencies are available to us and that we can do a cloud to it. So in other words, we can then put them up and we can say, you know what, these are some of my value levers. These are points at which you can integrate as an ISV, as an ecosystem, as a developer, as a vehicle software, as Siemens developing robotic control. And everything within them is therefore monetizable. And this is where this is one of the kind of aspects about making that pie have more ingredients. So Armita, you did mention you like pies, right? So how about you have a pie with even more ingredients, and it's a bigger pie, but it's also more tasty because there's more stuff available to eat. And as time goes on with release 17 now starting to be fixed, stabilized, and also other kind of associations going on around. I don't have time to cover all of the kind of side things. We have also the TM forum. We have various loose associations between operators and vendors to look at API standardization. So there's lots of good stuff happening. But within that, at some point, we have to sit down, and this is where the indecent and the decent exposure kind of wordplay comes out, is that decently done, this opportunity, if you like, and copying that cloud model, that cloud business model, that really cataloging everything and opening yourself up and allowing others to adapt and adopt and integrate, that's where the new money is, right? And that's a really key point. And so just to play, so I use the AWS example, so I hope they're watching, and if you are, then ping me and tell me what you think of the idea. So I'm an amateur photographer, right? So I happen to have Photoshop, and I borrowed my Photoshop to invent a concept. So if any of you have ever used AWS, and if you haven't, I well advise it because it's kind of fun to see how accessible it is. You take your own credit card, you create an account, you put your credit card in just to have something, if you were to have something to pay. And then the first thing you see is you'll go into your management console. And then suddenly, within 5 minutes, you can start to be dragging down some compute and upload some applications and do this, do that. It's just automatic, right? All the complexity is absolutely hidden away, and you can adopt it like that. Now, that for me, I find that incredible. I don't know about maybe if you guys you think, it's so old hat now, but it's not. This is incredible. The complexity of things going on behind these is astounding. Now, as you see, so in my Photoshop skills, as I kind of deleted a section that they normally have here, and I found their font, and I added an imaginary section called 5G programmable technologies. And what you'll see in here is effectively these currencies I've been talking about, is to say, well, actually, why don't we then reflect those currencies? And maybe, as a CSP with my brand, I can project those currencies directly to my markets, So I'll have a go-to-market channel in my country or in my region, and developers and ecosystems around me can adopt, and that's great. It's good. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's definitely valid. But what about the point of saying, well, actually, why do I need to be visible? Because actually, I'm a platform, and there are other platforms around me, and perhaps they're differently visible to me. Maybe they're more visible, or they're more global, or perhaps they target different end sectors than I can. So, in other words, how can I amplify myself? And this was the point of this. This is just a kind of idea seeding exercise. Is that in fact there are relationships which can be created and go-to-market channels which become available, which are effectively triggered by the decent execution of exposure, right? So I think with that, I'm going to hand over to Armita, because we have a poll question.
Yes, thank you, David. Thank you for those parallels. Okay, let me push out the poll question to the audience, and I'll read it out for everybody. So the question is, what has been stopping or restricting CSPs from becoming active players in dynamic platform ecosystems, such as in which the cloud hyperscalers have done so well? We've got a few options, so I'll just read them out quickly as well. Trust in the notion of opening access via exposure, lack of in-house cloud or other related expertise, other business priorities, missing network capabilities, lack of or no evident available exposure solutions, and finally, unclear how to monetize and create business case. So while we wait for the audience, David, I was just wondering if I could ask you a question. Are there any similar, in any way, what you're suggesting here, is that in any way similar to the API and developer ecosystem already in place in the smartphone and smart devices space, or any other areas? And if so, what are the parallels there?
Yeah, okay, no, it's a good one. So please, folks, do click the answer which you think is appropriate. So maybe have half an eye on that and 2 ears on me responding to you, Armita. So look, I gave the parallel with cloud because I think, again, that's about exposure of effectively a lot of technology assets and the commercialization of them and the interlocking of what they provide into markets which then consume them, whether it's financial sector or medical or ports, maritime, this type of thing. There's a very, very wide list of segments which adopt cloud, and they adopt it by effectively understanding and integrating with all of those services which are called out. They have a name, they have a way to integrate, they have APIs. And so that's, I think that was a fairly clear comparison, right? But I think there is another one, and you put your finger on it, which is saying, actually inside the mobile industry itself, what's happened, and it's kind of happened without the CSPs. If you look back in 2008, I think was the date when iPhone 3 was launched, and then the whole, and obviously Google with Android and everything came out, very, very quickly, and the app stores exist, and now we have that kind of bipolar kind of powerhouse of Apple iOS and Android with the device platforms behind them and with the app stores. And actually what you get there is an existing system which is incredible. Now, if you look, focusing on Apple, for example, as an Apple developer, so if I'm two guys in a garage or if I'm a massive development organization, it really doesn't matter. I have access to, I believe, more than 25,000 APIs. And these APIs are driven through the platform itself, so the iOS on the device, and the App Store itself, and the kind of infrastructure that goes around that. And with that combination of APIs, and think about it, and I'll show you my demo again. So back to my iPhone, the number of sensors and the number of things which are inside this, which it can do. It can recognize my face, it can sense acceleration, which direction it's turning, with the GPS chipset in there, the battery level, the camera, the LiDAR detector. It just goes on and on. And what's happened is that through the kind of connection of layers here, so you have the technology platform, the device, you have the exposure through the operating system and the App Store itself, then the adoption of those APIs, that's what's made such incredible experiences possible and incredible financial relationships and ecosystems be built up around that over the last 10 years, or the last 14 years now. And so, and that happened because the device exposes upwards and then the software exposes outwards, and that, and it's an open system. And for me, that's if we ever need any proof point, it's in our pocket. It's in our pocket all the time. So at a kind of microcosm level, that's been driving an extremely innovative industry. Just look at applications like Uber. Just for example, it just comes to my head. Again, no affiliation. Is that experience would not be possible. So we're turning the impossible to the possible. It would not be possible without that exposure of APIs. Okay. And now if we wipe that off the table and come back to our topic, the exposure of the network APIs, of the asset APIs, the IT APIs, a lot of APIs within the operator, that can also then generate that same kind of snowball effect, that positive feedback effect of transformation of the ecosystems that sit around and adopt that. So anyway, that's my, I can never give short answers, so that's my short answer to your question.
Thank you so much, David. We've got a few answers from the audience, so I'm going to push our results. And it seems like there's a little bit of a consensus there. So I'm going to just quickly, about nearly 20% believe the lack of in-house cloud or other related expertise or other business priorities, or the reason for that. And then also about 10% believe lack of or no evident available exposure solutions there. So I'll leave that to you to interpret.
All right, thanks. Yeah, no, I'm watching the clock a bit, so I don't spend too much on this one, but it is, thank you, first of all, guys, for responding. This is it, right? So monetization and building business around it, this is back to my indecent play on words. Indecently done, it's true. It is very difficult to monetize because nothing scales, there's no snowball effect, there's no massive adoption, you're not running all the go-to-market channels, you're not scaling, you're not becoming relevant to enough people, and therefore the momentum's not created. And I think that's a lot of what I'm talking about here, and a lot of the things that we focus on, that I focus on in my day job, is really doing that translation between the real world of real companies solving real business outcomes, adopting technology that's around them, and my God, there's a lot. and I think the CSP's place then is to really focus on looking into how to express that to their customers, and therefore that translates into monetization. So moving swiftly on, let's talk about Lego. All right, so we've been talking about exposure a bit too long, so that's a joke. So in the language of Lego, and thank you to Lego, because I think that's half the reason why I became an engineer, because I spent my whole life playing with Lego until I was probably a bit too old. I have stopped now. So yeah, back to these capabilities, back to these lots of horses in the network. In a sense, these Lego bricks at the bottom, all different colors, shapes, and sizes, these represent things that are available within the networks, also within the IT systems. These are the raw assets. These are these raw currencies which are in your kit bag. Okay, as a CSP, you have these, all right? And the point of exposure then is to then say, right, okay, a lot of them have just been hidden away. A lot of them I've done nothing ever with them. But actually, the point of exposure is saying, I'm going to pick these bits of Lego up now. I'm going to understand them. I'm going to understand what this language of the networks, the language of the IT systems actually is. And I'm going to understand how to then assemble them into abstracted APIs. And it's really these abstracted APIs that start to become relevant. So this point on difficulty of monetization, if you try to monetize the bricks, that's hard. But the more you abstract, the more value you build on there, the more relevance you create, maintaining, of course, the ability to monetize. Because, of course, you can't just abstract and then give it away. There's got to be a monetization engine in there. That allows you to then finally translate to talking the language of business. So if I'm building diggers, if I'm building connected vehicles, whatever I'm doing in my job, in the ecosystem, I can understand these abstracted APIs because they've thought of me. And they thought of me because they understand my business. They understand my outcomes, which I'm trying to achieve. And they've mapped that back to those Lego bricks. And that's really how, I hope the kind of thinking process works. I think it's a cool way to show it. So that's my Lego example. One techie slide, because I think it's it's good to give the detail. So for those of you who are in the details, I think this will talk fairly loudly to you. Exposure is sat here, so this is actually our particular logo for our own product for exposure. But this is really an exposure function here. In this case, more generically, again, I'll talk about exposure of value. You can see on the left-hand side, it's exposing what we call the 5G runtime. Okay, so all of these acronyms here, and this is only part of a 5G core network. So remember I talked about 5G standalone? Well, 5G standalone actually has been, as I mentioned, disaggregated. It's kind of cloud native now. It runs on a REST-based architecture called SBA, service-based architecture, which is basically based on HTTP. And so it's really interesting. These just looks like applications now, right? But each one of these, and again, I've been selective here, partially for space, but also these are some of the main kind of value levers within the network. These are the components which actually we can expose, and we can even expose core flows within them. And so we can even negotiate and orchestrate events to happen so that the exposition of that runtime allows us to then say, I'm going to project that out. So a number of service APIs. So this is the abstraction I was talking about. I can now call it something. It has an English name or a Spanish name or wherever we are. And I'm going to then effectively build a business lifecycle around that. And I'm going to project that through one or more go-to-market channels. This is really important, right? So look on the left, my God, it's complex. Look in the middle, we've got some clarity being built. Look on the right, and we have effectively a little bit like a camera lens. We have an ability to project in different ways in the language of business. All right, so if I am that VR development company, if I do develop drones, if I am BMW with my cars, I'm being projected to in a way which I can relate. My developers get it, my business people get it, my industry gets it. And by the way, we may not do it alone. As a CSP, we may, as I previously alluded to, we may not always try to reach these markets directly. This is where partnerships and the ability to wholesale and to build as-a-service models and to build those value chains and to monetize them. And by the way, if you think about everything I'm talking about there, most of the issues here, most of the challenges are actually in the IT world. All right. So although exposure is being defined in 3GPP, the real success of it, so indecent to decent, to get rid of the in of indecent, then we need to execute really well on the right-hand side. And that's where, that's where a lot of focus has to be put in. And in your strategy, this has got to be something which has got to be front and center. The integration to the network on the left-hand side has to be a given. Of course, if it doesn't integrate, it doesn't work. But where the difference is made and where the power comes from is on the right-hand side. And I'll just briefly, point out on the bottom left of this whole chart, you'll see complementary APIs because there's value in exposing more. 3GPP talk about exposing a lot of stuff that goes on in the network. It's actually relatively easy to also expose a little bit, more things than they define still within the SBA environment. That's another conversation. We can also expose some things from 4G, by the way. But like I was saying, there's a lot of other things going on in the IT world, especially in BSS and OSS systems, where there's a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of there's a lot of power in knowledge, I think, as you gave an Einstein comment earlier on. That's my quote of the day, although I can't think who said it. So power in knowledge, I think, is a very strong thing. And power in knowledge, well, power is value, and value is revenues, right? So there is this concept of exposing more, I think. And how do we project that to the outside world? How does it instantiate itself in the real world? This is a different way of looking at it. A lot of things have been simplified here. The networks are down at the bottom. We've got the BSS and OSS up there, building catalogs, making shape out of all these things, because a network is just a set of boxes, right? It's a very complex thing to do, and the build process is really important, but it's a totally separate problem from everything else on the slide, which is how do you commercialize this stuff? How do you build propositions? How do you project into a marketplace? Is it your marketplace? Do you white label a marketplace for someone else to do, for many people to do? Do you build second brands? Do you build specialist brands, kind of V&Os for industries, for example? Why not? Why not let the investors come in and run yourself, run spin-offs? All sorts of things become possible, because what you're doing is you've effectively taken your entire set of assets and you've made them available for innovation, whether it's in your own company or whether it's driven out through an API ecosystem, which is projected through marketplaces and projected through partnerships and all the rest, right? So this is a very powerful kind of business construct to become aware of. So I'll just summarize now to leave a few minutes for Q&A. At the end of the day, as we said, 5G operators, they need to create an ROI on, yes, yet another investment round. And don't forget, 4G is still growing like that. So we haven't forgotten 4G. This is not just about 5G. But if we're investing in 5G new radio, we're maybe investing in Open RAN, which changes the transport network as well, and lots of lots of other projects that nobody talks about. There's a RIC going in there, non-real-time RIC, and all these new acronyms, and there's a 5G core, and we've got to buy some cloud. And how do you return the investment on that? Is it just doing the same thing and expecting different results? No, right? So that's really one of the big takeaways. And so we do have all these new horses. We have these Lego bricks, and a lot more of them, a lot that perhaps we never thought of. They're all down there. They're all ready to be played with, but a lot of them are just kind of dusty and nobody's doing anything with them. And there are some new ones, but they will stay locked away without well-executed exposure, decent exposure. And so, just to make the final point, as I mentioned before, building the networks, there's nothing more important than that. I've spent a big part of my professional life doing that. And it's, will always be important, but it's a very, very different kettle of fish. I know that's a very English expression, but it's a very different challenge. It's a very different, it has different success factors, let's say, than building the monetization and the value-based architecture, which we've been talking about through this whole presentation. All right, so they're quite distinct from each other. And I think it's important then to give the focus and to provide the kind of strategic leadership to this that it deserves, because without doing that, it will be indecent exposure. So back to you, Armita.
Thank you very much, David, for that excellent presentation on CSP network and IT system exposure. So we've got a little bit of time left for Q&A, and I'm just gonna really delve right into it, into the audience questions. Fantastic. So let me have a quick browse. We've got a question that's about how operators can make APIs truly simple and attractive to developers. Do you have any thoughts on that, David?
Right. And oh God, that's a good question. And no, we didn't script that question. So I just like to tell the audience here, for those watching, this is truly a live session, and I don't know how to prove that, but this is a live session. We took the risk. It's always easier to pre-record, and I normally do that, but this is fun, right? This is hot, and that's a good question. So I'll bring up a third, because all good things comes in threes, right? So there's the expression, who was it? I think it was Mark Twain who said, I tried to write a shorter story, but I didn't have time. Something like that. It's difficult to simplify. This is the point. Just listen to me talking. I usually give an answer that long when it could come out that long. So I think that aspect of simplification, that abstraction that we talked about, first of all, I can't give you the actual answer now. And the reason I can't give you the actual answer now is that it's a learning experience. So yes, there are initiatives to make this happen. We're involved in that, by the way. I'm involved in that. And so there are forward-thinking initiatives saying, oh my God, these APIs out of the standards, they're full of telco jargon. Why would a BMW developer care about telco jargon? His job is already complicated enough. He gets cars and MMI systems and anti-lock braking systems and all that stuff. So that kind of forward-thinking abstraction is happening. All right. So there are associations going on. Some of it formal, some of it informal. But I think that the application of machine learning and effectively the clever use of metadata is what would allow us as an industry, again, I represent a vendor here, right? But for me, this is about partnership, that if we put the right instrumentation in there and actually understand and rapidly react, rapidly pivot around how APIs are being adopted, what's going wrong, what's being inefficient, how could we improve that? And we can improve it in half a day. All right, so that's for me, the attitude here is that we need to transform this part of the CSP to run at cloud speed. Don't forget, running at cloud speed means possibly pushing out many updates even per day, right? And this is real. I think Google pushes out 10,000 updates a day or something to their system. I mean, I'm not saying we get to that level. So a lot of my answer is about active learning and active focus, and this is a partnership thing to be able to do that. So good question, Mike.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you, David. And there's another question about competitive landscape, I'd say. So if the CSPs don't manage to do this, take it, the reference here is network exposure, which company type is most likely to succeed? Is it integrators or is it hyperscalers?
Yeah. Oh dear. Yeah, that's because obviously I can't see who's in the audience here and who's going to watch this. It's a sensitive question, of course. You know, I think, as I've said, emotionally, I'm very attached to the CSP market. It's, you know, I think it's an amazing place to work. I think it's, you know, it's an evolution which has been very exciting, very professionally satisfying for all of us, I think, who work in that. It is frustrating, I think, that our industry isn't making the new money as quickly as we should be and could be. That's my belief. But what's true is that market forces, you know, it's a bit like a flood, you know. I mean, there's been a few recently around the world. If it rains that much, then there's no stopping the water in the end, right? And as much as you put sandbags and you kind of barricade yourself in and think, ah, it's all right, I'm impenetrable now, and I'm in a position of force and all that. The reality is you're not. And, you know, technology will skirt around you at some point. And, you know, I have to say, you know, your list there, I can see the question in front of me, your list there is quite valid. I think any player could, in fact, start to play within that. Clearly, as a CSP, you know, obviously there is a point that the CSP, you do have effectively protected assets, you know. So I showed you all those boxes earlier on. There's a lot of runtime stuff, there's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of things going on. And of course, that's a highly secure environment. So I'm not suggesting somebody could just rock up and somehow sneak their way in and do something with that. But having said that, just the sheer value of doing it will at some point mean that some entity, if it's not the CSP, will then effectively build it into such a powerful proposition that it becomes irresistible. And that would then mean that the CSP missed the opportunity because they should have done it. And I think it's at that point, and this is a real-time answer, of course. I haven't perhaps thought of some of the angles, but it is a risk. It is an active risk, and I think, you know, more than ever, that's why CSPs, especially as they move into standalone now, yes, focus on the network build. Yes, get it right. Yes, get the cloud adoption proper. Private cloud is not always the answer. There's another whole discussion on that. But, you know, I think this monetization, if we don't pick it up as an industry, and operator by operator, or operator group by operator group, and that we strategize on that, and we head for a goal, and that we do things that will get us to that goal, then I think that question has a kind of answer embedded in it, because somebody else will do it.
Fantastic, thank you. David, I'm going to pose one more question on you. So what will be your advice to operators still busy developing 4G and legacy 2G and 3G networks? So here the person is thinking about African CSPs, for example. What should be their key focus now in order to not be left behind, really?
Yeah, I didn't see the question, so I didn't see if 5G is being built there. So it's true. You know, 5G is not everywhere, and by the way, even where it is deployed, you know, let's not forget, and this has always been the case from 1G onwards. It's always been the case. There'll be plenty of not spots, right? So I'm not by any means imagining that 5G is contiguous everywhere, and even if it's foggy or snowing, then everything works perfectly. There are physical problems around us. And as you say, there are market dynamics in some countries, you know, with the penetration of devices or something, then there's more of a kind of shift where there's still a huge amount of GSM and everything. You know, exposure is not just about those 5G currencies. So yes, for sure, that's the shiny new stuff, and there's plenty of good things there. In developed and advanced markets where the adoption is ready for it, I think it's go. I think there we should be all guns. In countries mentioned in that question, 5G does still have a place, right? So the advent of 5G private networks, which are, if you like, they're basically quality-based Wi-Fi network. I mean, that's the easiest thing to compare them to, with all the value levers and the quality levers and the reliability and everything which Wi-Fi doesn't have. That they do have a place in those countries as well, right? So there's often, you know, a lot of industry, mining, all this type of thing. There's a game to play, I think, if we can talk about, you know, effectively building some gameplay scenario behind it. But when it comes to 2G, maybe 4G networks, and obviously 4G is very prevalent, there are still a number of currencies which exist, which 5G just adds to, I think there are enough currencies within there, and given because what I haven't mentioned in all this, I think, is that it's not just that the network providers are becoming more ready to expose. I think the thing I didn't mention, I should have mentioned, is that the destination markets, so the people you're trying to integrate to, they're the ones who are ready, and because they know how to do this. They've already been adopting APIs. I showed you in cloud players between each other, and that didn't exist a few years ago, I think. So I think you're in a sense you're pushing on an open door, and if you only have 4G and maybe 2G, I think there's still enough things, plenty of things that you can do. Get yourself into place. When you do deploy 5G, boom, you've already set up the ecosystem. You've already set up the ability to monetize, and 5G just becomes incremental and makes money from day one.
Super. Thank you, David. And I'm going to throw one final concluding question at you. And this one is, where are tier one operators at in terms of network exposure function rollouts?
Yeah, it's a good one. So, and I would add tier 0 to that list as well, because I think there really are some huge players in the world who are relatively advanced with this type of thinking. I think tier ones are in general still focused on the SA build. Again, speaking middle of 2022. There's a lot of unexpected complexity. There's a lot of learning to do. There's a lot of hiring that they need to do, to make these networks truly operable and trustworthy, and really to adopt cloud properly. You need to hire some people, and they're hard to get now, right? There's a lot of competition for that type of people. So there's some very human issues going on there. There's also a huge amount of focus in the RAN. This whole point of Open RAN and the very different economics that you can benefit from that. So in a sense, I think tier ones are still focused on where the real cost elements are. And let's not forget that networks are still, it's a network build that costs the real money here. And I think that's a real challenge. So the side effect of that, the way I'm observing it, is that these topics here, there's been a recent ramping up of interest. I think in the past few months, there's been enough latitude now that some parts of the organizations are starting to turn their focus and really ask the question, how do we make new money? Where's that new money really coming from? Because I think the board, the investors, they know the numbers I showed on that second slide. They know that. It hurts them. And I think now that's effectively trickling down, and managers and division managers are now being challenged with, how are you guys going to do something different? How are you going to wake up tomorrow and not do the same thing and expect something different? So I'm starting to see a real tick up of interest, and I would definitely encourage discussions with myself, with my team, between the industry, however it happens. Let's make this happen, because if we all do it, then it really amplifies the benefit for everyone, because it becomes global. So